everybody, how are you doing today? I hope everyone's doing well. I thought I'd do something a little bit different today. Let's just talk about something a bit more positive, a bit more what would I say? Spiritual, maybe. And that is my memories, or some of my best memories from growing up. Like everyone, I have a number of things, a number of periods in my life that I look back on mostly with fondness and happiness. Yeah, as a kid, the things I loved about being a kid was the sense of freedom, the sense of just doing whatever you kind of wanted to do. And having friends at that time and having a laugh, joking, playing silly games, having a bit of banter with each other. Watching cartoons. We used to watch things like Transformers, Digimon, Pokemon back in the day. There was such a plethora of great kids shows in the 90s and 90s. One of the best ones that I can think of off the top of my head here is one called Dick and Dom. Dick and Dom the Bungalow. Not only was it it was funny, but it was also kind of, you could always learn something from it. I remember Art Attack. There was another program called Art Attack. Obviously Mr. Bean was very popular back then. There was just so many things, so many great kids, shows, and obviously cartoons. The whole Marvel thing was still very popular back then. I remember my dad used to tape things on VHS. Obviously wrestling was a massive thing during the late 90s, early 90s. The likes of Kane, Undertaker, Mankind, X-Pac, Sonya, Triple H, you name it. Owen Hart, Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, etc., etc. It was such a wicked time to be a kid. I used to love watching wrestling. I used to watch a lot of those wrestling usually I think it was on a Friday night, and I don't know if it was SmackDown or something, I think I might have been on Saturday mornings. I used to watch Dad used to tape the pay-per-view stuff from time to time, the Royal Rumble events and things. It was just wicked. I always loved the Hell in a Cell matches, the TLC matches. It was just fucking wicked, man. But then obviously as I got older, I kind of lost a bit of my interest in wrestling. But I always look back at those memories, and it was such a fucking great time to be alive as a kid. And just the advertisements on the TV. I used to love Christmases back then. I mean, obviously I was a kid, but it was fucking special, man, back then, back in those days. It was commercialisation of Christmas, but it was it was just so special, like the advent calendar thing, the Christmas parties at school. It was so good. I always remember that, like leading up to it, and like you had to bring your own snacks to the Christmas party and stuff like that. It was, you had all the kind of cheesy Christmas music. Even leading up to the party, like they used to play on cassette. We had like a cassette player in our primary school, and during lunch, they used to play some Christmas stuff on it, and obviously Wham or whatever else was playing on it at the time, but it was pretty much your kind of typical 70s, 80s stuff. Whatever is new, probably, I don't know, but mostly 70s and 80s music, I think. And I remember in PE or sports class, I must have been about 5 or 6. Just while we're on the topic of music here, I remember the first time, I think probably the first time that I actually ever enjoyed music, and that was, we were doing, I don't know if it was some kind of I can't remember exactly what it was. I don't know if it was some kind of stretching activity or something, but I just remember it was I remember there being classical music on. So I don't know if it was a CD or cassette player, I'm not sure, but I just remember that very vividly. And I don't know if it was something like by Boccherini or Mozart, I can't remember now, but it was definitely something. It sounded like something sort of, I can't remember what it was, but it was definitely something along the lines of maybe something Baroque or classical of some sort. I can't remember now, to be honest, but I just remember that it was something that stood out to me. We all have those memories, don't we? We all have those little pivotal moments in our lives where something sticks with us. A memory, an event, a friendship, a relationship, an accident, whatever it might be, something, just a little pivotal moment, something that's just sticks in your head for some reason or other. I had loads of those. I still have. I remember our teachers at school dressing up. We used to have these fancy dress kind of days or whatever you call them. You used to come to school wearing whatever you wanted. I think it was 50p. That's something ridiculous, 50p at the time, which was a lot of money to a kid. But yeah, it was just wild, man. I'm sure, obviously, for those at the time, obviously it's just a normal everyday thing, But having said that, the staff, if people seem to enjoy things a bit more back then, Christmas seemed to be a bit more special than it is today. It had a bit more of it still had a bit of, there was an air of joy about it still, there was an air of, I don't know, I've always loved Christmas. That's why I put together those Christmas compilations on my channel here. And I'm working on some new compilations over the coming weeks, months. So if you're interested in choral music or organ music or piano music, or maybe I might even put some new mixes up as well. So I'm thinking about doing some new garage stuff, maybe some drum and bass stuff. So look out for that at some point. I don't know, might be early next year when that stuff finally gets put up. I'm not sure, but I might even put up some poetry at some point as well. Might start uploading some of that stuff. I've written quite a bit of poetry over the years, and I just never really felt like it was good enough to publish, in any real, in a way that I felt I didn't really think I didn't really feel satisfied with it, so I've never really published it. Most of it has been sat in my emails for a few years, or in little notebooks. I would like to post some of that. What I don't want my channel to be is just one source. I mean, it doesn't matter too much, but I kind of want this channel to be a bit more than just one thing. But anyway, I just want to just get out there. Just while we're on the topic of music, one other strange thing that I remember from being a kid was, and this is going to make me sound really fucking weird, but was the smell of the fumes from petrol engine cars. Like I always remember that very, very, very vividly. Being at school, there was a number of houses that connected to the school, were very much connected to it. And one of them, the one right next to the school gate, had like a small driveway. And every morning I would come to school, that car would, I'm guessing they were going out to work. Because I think I used to go to school at 8 o'clock in the morning, I think. From what I can remember. Maybe 8:30 maybe. And I just always remember that. I remember that's very strong smell. And diesel as well. When the contractors used to come to the school to cut the grass and everything, you have this wicked Case International tractor, 4230 tractor that used to come in obviously from the sort of mid to late spring up until probably sort of September time. And I just always remember that. I always remember the smell of the diesel and the smell of the cut grass, and the team used to come in sometimes with their wood chipper machine, and it'd just be this cacophony of sound, like it'd just be this I have talked about this before, but that's something that stayed with me, and I just loved all of it. I loved snow as a kid as well. I always remember like coming to school when it was snowing, or when the snow had laid after a couple of hours or a day or so, whatever. Because we had quite a big field, quite a large field attached to our school. And I just remember like building snowmen and fighting, and we had at the back of our field we had all of this hedge, sort of like very sort of wild growing kind of hedgerow like sort of space, and you could hide in it. You could go in it, and the teachers wouldn't be able to see where you are. And we just loved all that. We used to climb on the trees, and we had a few trees you could climb on, some pretty big ones. Big to us as kids. And it was just wicked. It was just absolutely fantastic. I really loved. I must say that I genuinely loved my primary school years for the most part. Even though I went through a bit of bullying back then, I did for the most part enjoy it. I enjoyed the school because I always liked the walk to school. I always liked meeting my friends, whether it was like meeting my friends at their house. Like sometimes I'd go to their house, and then we'd walk to school. Sometimes my friend, as I've mentioned before, his granddad would take us to school. Not very often, but just every now and again he would take us in his Ford Scorpio, Ford Grenade, or whatever it was. I think it was a Scorpio. Heated seats. It's just very long black. Is it called like a sedan? Or what do you call them? It's not a hatchback, is it? I'm not quite sure. Cars have never really lingo never really was my strong point, I admit. But yeah, I don't know. That was something that I loved about being a kid back then. It was very comfortable. Had these leather seats. It was really. And it had this smell to it as well. It had this very sort of pungent, but kind of very. It's hard to explain. Like it wasn't. I don't think it was the smell of the leather, but it was. I think it was just the general smell of the car. It just had this very kind of. I don't know how to describe it. It was a very comfortable smell, strong but comfortable. And it was. I just loved it. I loved it. I loved the cars back then as well. All the different types of Fords and. I just remember always being fascinated by car exhausts for some reason. I don't know why, but and springs, suspension systems. I was fascinated by Ford. Mostly Ford cars when I was a kid. And Renaults, quite liked Renaults. I'm very much into things like the Mondeo, the Escort, the Scorpio, etc. I never really, weirdly, it's kind of a bit strange to say because I never really got into cars. It never became my thing, but I quite liked the design of cars, but I was never that interested in the kind of nitty gritty stuff. I was never really interested in all the details of it. So it was for me, being a kid, it was a very exciting time, because you were looking towards the millennium. You was, wondering how the world was going to change, and digital was just becoming kind of starting to become a very popular thing by the time I was in my teens. The DVD thing came in. I think it was in the late 90s. I think early 2000s. I think it was mostly popular by sort of the mid 2000s, really. I remember that transition from VHS to DVD players, and from cassettes to CD players, and the Walkman was very much popular then. And then the MP3 thing came in the mid 2000s. From what I can recall, I think it was just starting to become popular. I think somewhere between sort of the early to mid 2000s. But I don't really think it became really truly popular until the sort of mid to late noughties, really, for the most part. CDs were still very much popular, even into the early 2010s. I think I'd say sort of early 2010s onwards. It was slowly, gradually starting to become the CD. The culture of the CD started to decline massively. And you had the rise of the vinyl, the surge of vinyl popularity again. So, my childhood was very much a very fulfilling time. I loved riding around my estate on my bike, and I used to go all over the place. I would go miles away from my house, and it didn't bother me. Sometimes, when I was like 10 or 11 years old, sometimes I used to, with my friends, we used to ride out to the nearest, towns and whatever. So we used to sometimes go to the opposite end of the city and And it didn't, we didn't really think anything of it. We were just kids, we were naive, we were young, but I don't know. It's like we sort of like felt a bit safer. I mean, it's like if I was a kid now, I don't know if I would do that these days, but back then, it was. Most people didn't really bat an eyelid. It was just like you just kind of felt safe, really. I certainly felt safe for the most part. I mean, you tried to like avoid certain areas, but I'd say generally speaking, it was pretty. Because usually I tended to go out early in the morning or late on at night, and it was just something that I loved getting out and being free, and like getting away from the mundanity at home, because home life often meant, bickering with my brothers, or the odd argument with my parents or whatever, something silly. You know what parents are like. You know what families are like. When you're a kid, especially when you're a teenager, so you want to get away from that stuff. And it was just really fucking a very, very, very special time. Not always easy, but a special time. And I always loved going down to the docks. I'm not saying anything I haven't already said on other videos here, I don't think, at this point, but I just kind of wanted to make a whole video, really, just around my kind of memories, just for a bit of a change, instead of the philosophical stuff, because it does get a bit exhausting and a bit boring, to be honest. And sometimes I just don't really know what to talk about. Sometimes I want to make a video, but I don't really know what I want to talk about. So sometimes you go into a video and you think, well, I'm not exactly sure how this is going to pan out, but I just want to talk about something. But, as I've said before, when I was in my teens, I used to spend a lot of time by the docks, by the River Humber. Usually on my own, but sometimes with my friend David. We used to spend a lot of time by the docks, and later on, I think he had a bit of an interest in ships. So we used to kind of go down there, sort of for that reason, but mostly I think it was just for a bit of peace. It was just to kind of get away from everything on the estate, because there were always things going on. There was always antisocial behaviour, and police presence was never too far away. So it was definitely a bit of a rough area. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't exactly an ideal situation for people to be brought up into, but you tried to make the best of it. You did what you could to make the best of it, and you avoided certain people, you avoided certain places at certain times, and you just sort of kept your head down and didn't make a scene, and usually you were kind of left alone to use most of the time. But every now and again you'd bump into someone that was a bit of an asshole, and they test you, or they're with their mates and whatever. You try and get yourself out of that situation. But usually, if you were smart like I tried to be anyway, you went down. You was very strategic about the ways in which you went around your area. You avoided this street, you avoided that road as best as you could. And I think for the most part, I used to go down by I think most of the time, from what I can remember anyway, I think I used to go down we had a thing near our house called the track. We called it the track, and the reason we called it the track was because it used to be a train track at one time. It used to it led to a coastal town. I don't know if it was like 25, maybe something like 20 miles away, maybe something, I'm not 25 miles away, I'm not exactly sure. And that got ditched, I think, in the 60s or 70s. And so it was turned into, well, some of it was turned into a bike path. So I think a lot of the time I used to go down that bike path or that track and spend time by the docks because it was peaceful. It was tranquil. You know, it was quiet most of the time. Apart from the noise of the trucks and whatever was getting loaded onto the. Because from my city, there was like a little area where there was like a little bridge where you could. Or you could chill out and you could watch the big ferry being loaded or unloaded, and that used to take people across to Rotterdam, Zeebrugge, I think, Zeebrugge, or Zeebrugge, however you pronounce it. So, and every now and again you'd see some big ships as well. So I just loved it back then. You know, it was very much that very early 2000s vibe. You know, it was very. It's hard to explain what it felt like back then. It's very difficult to put into words. You know, the best thing you could do is to watch footage of just watch footage of transport and things of stuff from the early to mid 2000s and in the UK, and you'll kind of get a general kind of vibe of it. It's hard to explain. It's hard to. I don't really know how to explain it, but it just had this feel to it back then. The 90s, the 90s, even really the 2010s to a certain extent. You know, there was still very much a kind of. There was a comfort in feeling about that time. You know, it was still a bit kind of grainy, it's still a bit greyish in some sort of weird way. I'm trying to think of a way to explain it to you. You know, it was very much still, you know, we had none of this electric bullshit going on. We had none of this autonomous vehicle crap going on back then. You know, it was very much diesel and petroleum based vehicles, and you know, I loved all that. I loved all the smells, and you know, the buses we used to go on, the taxis we used to get. It was a completely different experience than today. It was. Everything now feels very kind of things feel very sterilized now. Maybe that's the word to use. Everything feels very much over the top in terms of safety and security, and it wasn't quite like that back then. You know, there was more of a sense of freedom. So yeah, you had the odd camera and things here and there, but it wasn't like dominated everywhere. You know, we weren't like constantly worried about the threats of terrorism or the threats of paedophiles or whatever. It's like, generally speaking, I think most of them felt relatively safe, I would say. But I would say from sort of 2005 onwards, once the London bombings happened, I think really things started. I remember after that point, because I remember going into my train station, and you know, suddenly you didn't see bins anymore, and you know, there was announcements all the time about, you know, if you see any unattended luggage, report to the police, etc. So I just remember that sort of, coming towards the back end of the 2000s there, things started to change, and it just didn't feel the same anymore to me. Partly, I guess it was because I was becoming an adult, But it was also because like I just didn't. I started to feel less safe, and I felt that, at least for my country, that things weren't going in the direction that I liked. And obviously by the time we got to the financial crash of 08, it was kind of things from 08 onwards of just, to me, the UK started to get really, really shit. I would say sometime after 08, but certainly by the time we ended up in the mid 2010s, it just wasn't the same place anymore. Things had massively changed, and it's hard to explain what I mean when I say that. It's because it's not always obvious, might not always be obvious, but you had to be there, really. You had to live through it. It was the way that people changed. Trust went away. The generation of, my grandparents' generations were dying out, and I think we lost a lot of things when our grandparents went. I think there was a real sweet spot somewhere in the 90s and 2000s, because our parents were, most my generation's parents were born in the late 50s or early 60s, so they came of age in the 90s, 2000s. My grandparents were what back then? Let me see. Sort of in their 70s, 60s or 70s back then. So it was like there was a good like little sweet spot there somewhere between, I want to say between the mid 90s up until sort of the mid to late 2000s. I would say things felt more. I think things felt more stable back then. There was more of a sense of. There was still a sense of pride in the atmosphere. There was still a sense of we knew who we were. Or we felt we had something back then. We still had a. It's like politics wasn't quite as divided as it is now. I would say, everything wasn't about constant drama and all the time, and like it is today, everything's just about. Now it just feels like everything's just too. There's no novelty to anything anymore, I don't think. It's like back then, it's like things still kind of sort of felt like they had more meaning to them. Like I think we appreciate things a bit more back then than we do today. And I think people took care of things more. People had more pride in the things that they had. People had a bit more self-respect. People took pride, generally speaking, in the way that generally speaking, how they behaved and how they spoke. And, it wasn't utopia, but it was compared to today's world, it was, I would say it was quite a bit better, more interesting. And that's what's missing now. The world isn't as interesting anymore. Everything's in your face all the time, and I just, as an introvert, I don't like that. That's why I liked going to the docks. That's why I liked spending time by myself, because I didn't know it then, but I was an introvert. I preferred my own space usually. I mean, I like spending time with my older brother, my younger brother as well. I liked playing on my computer. I liked spending time with my friends from time to time. But I think for the most part, I preferred being on my own. There were many times when I would just go off on my own, especially during the summer. Like we'd be hanging out at the shops or on the grass and whatever we were doing. Sometimes we used to go to the school, we used to chill out at school in the park. the fields and whatever. But I remember like, I just remember like, the teachers being really suspicious somewhere in the early 2000s. Like, I remember like once coming to school and one of the teachers pulled me up for something. I was like, "Oh, was you involved in this last night? Was you doing this? We've seen something on the cameras and we think it's you." It's like, I thought you were innocent until proven guilty. It's like, and it wasn't me anyway. It turned out, But like I said, there was antisocial behaviour going on. There was a lot of vandalism and just feral kids out of control, and sometimes they would throw stones at people at houses and sort of piss about on the school grounds from time to time, even when they'd climb over the fences and stuff. So it's not, I'm not sitting here saying that it was some perfect time, but there were a lot of problems. But I would say that it was much more of an interesting time compared to today. Everything's too distilled, too diluted now. There's no rawness to life anymore. Everything's too comfortable, too easy, too convenient. It's just, there's no sense of real, nothing means anything because there's no struggle anymore. There's no real struggle anymore in certain ways. And as far as like my memories, what else can I say? About my being a kid, and I remember there was some kid that died, that got killed. I can't remember his name now. Outside of our primary school, and there was a plaque. I remember there was a plaque put up on the school gate. I think it was Christopher Pierce, I want to say, unless I'm wrong. I think it might be that. Can't remember. It was Christopher something. I always remember that for some reason. I remember seeing that. It didn't really mean much to me at the time, but I just remember always looking at it and being curious about it. And like, we had these anti-bullying campaigns at school. We had these, safety campaigns for, but sometimes we had these days every so often where people would come to school on their bikes and they'd have like bike training, and you'd also have these campaigns, child abuse safety campaigns, and don't talk to strangers, if this happens, don't do this, don't do that, and that stuff was going on in the late 90s. So there was, but as much as it's as weird as it is to say, I never really felt in any way unsafe, I suppose, certainly not around my school. I remember once I think it must have been sometime in the autumn or something. I went to my one of my friends at the time, James's house, and he was having a party. I think his sister was having a party, and I went round on his BMX at the time, and I don't think I came. I don't know what James's parents must have been thinking about. I don't know what the hell I was thinking, but I mean, I don't think I went home until about 11 o'clock or something like that, 10 or 11 o'clock. I mean, I was crazy back then. I really was wild, as a kid. I was so oblivious to the potential. Well, like I said, I didn't really feel unsafe even when I was walking home. Like I didn't really. I think I ran home actually, because I obviously knew I was going to get into so much shit. And I remember my dad like playing up, and he was pissed off with me, and rightfully so. Like anything could have happened to me. But again, I never really felt unsafe. I never felt like I was in any kind of danger though. But I could have been. Who knows what could have happened to me. It's sometimes the mind boggles. It's like you just think that could have ended so badly. Because you don't really know who's out there at that time of the night. I mean, there's hardly anybody around. And the thing is, I think I went, from what I can recall, I actually went down the worst possible. Well, actually, maybe not. I don't know. But I went. The way I went back home was like I went past the school, and I don't know whether that was perhaps to my advantage or not, because maybe it was better for me to have gone down that way because there was less traffic. But if I had gone down the main road, who knows what could have happened. I mean, then again, having said that, there probably would have been more witnesses. So, but at that time of the night, typically on that state, there wasn't usually too many people about. You didn't tend to see too many cars. It was usually pretty quiet. So I don't know, but like I said, it was just wild. I was a bit crazy back then, really. I remember me and my brother, when I was at secondary school, me and my brother would sometimes wrestle on the front area of the school, and it was just madness, really. We used to do all sorts of crazy shit, and I remember my brother once doing some John Cena move or whatever it was on me on a red box that we used to use for toys. I mean, it's just unbelievable, because we could have seriously injured ourselves, seriously could have. But we were just kids. We didn't know any better. Me and my younger brother, we used to wrestle in our bedroom, and we used to wrestle with teddy bears and fucking pillows, and it's just ridiculous shit. Absolutely ridiculous. We call ourselves barbarians, and it's just ridiculous. But it was fun at the time, and we used to jump off our window ledges, and much to the anger of my poor mother. But we didn't, we were just kids. We didn't really have anything else to do, But in a way, that was good, because it meant that we did other things. We weren't just glued to our console. And my dad wouldn't allow it anyway. It's like we would spend 2 hours or more on our PlayStation or whatever. And my dad at a certain point would just say, that's enough now, It's like, and I'm glad that he did, because that's how it should be, At least I can say that my dad, it was quite strict in some ways at times, but it was for our benefit. He knew that it was better for us to find other ways of having fun. But always don't forget that back then as well, the TV was still pretty good, and so there was always something to watch on the TV. I always remember watching stuff with my parents. Before we used to go to bed, my mother used to make us some hot chocolate, and sometimes we'd have like a little snack, and we'd watch something together as a family. If it wasn't some movie, it was some kind of series of some sort. Especially as we got into our teens, we started to understand some things a bit more, and that was good. I enjoyed that. I liked that a lot, because it was a time when we could just all sit down and just sort of just chill out. We weren't all at each other's throats all the time, and it was nice to just be at peace with everybody. I remember going to the park with my friends, and used to play silly little games. We had these little concrete mushroom things. I don't know if you ever had them in your local park, but back then we had these little everything was a lot of things were kind of primitive in the park, the original park before it got redeveloped. In I think it was, I want to say 03 or something like that. We had all these pretty dangerous stuff, really. And we used to do all sorts of crazy shit as kids, especially as teenagers. We used to jump off these big trash cans onto piles of cardboard boxes with rotten fruit in them, and we used to have wrestling matches and boxing matches. Fucking stupid. But we always had fun, It's somewhere every now and again someone's feelings got hurt, or someone, had mild, very sort of minor cut or bruise or a small injury or something. But typically, it was we had fun, we had good times. But I think eventually I just stopped going to the park because it was just just became full of wankers in the end. It just became full of just kids that think they've got something to prove, just your typical bully types. And so, yeah, I just stopped going to the park, really. But I used to spend some time by myself in the park as well. So I was always the standout kid, That's the truth. I was always the weird one, why are you on your own, what are you doing, and it just didn't lend itself very well to that kind of environment, unfortunately. But again, you just tried to make the best of it. You just did what you could to adapt to that circumstance, And most of the time, I just tried to avoid a lot of people as best as I could. Sometimes I kind of felt a bit trapped by my surroundings, if I'm honest. And I suppose that's why I used to kind of liked going elsewhere, going to the other parts of the city where people didn't know me and I didn't know anybody else there for the most part. You might see somebody you knew from time to time, but only from a distance. Because, like I said, I used to spend most of the time on my bike. So, it's. And sometimes I used to ride all the way out to a local coastal town. It must be probably a good 20 miles away from my city. We're talking about when I'm like 12 years old here, 13 years old. I mean, riding my bike on a main road. Honestly, I shouldn't even be here right now. I shouldn't even be alive. The amount of crazy shit I got up to, and me and my friends. We should just get into all sorts of just trouble from time to time. And, it was just up to no good, vandalising things and stealing things. And, I'm not proud of it, but I'm not going to say that it wasn't fun at the time. It was, getting chased by people and getting chased by the cops from time to time. It's cringy looking back on it now as an adult, but at the time it was fun then. It was exhilarating. It was adrenaline fueling stuff back then. As much as I don't like to admit it, but it was. And like I said, I'm not perfect. I didn't have a perfect upbringing. And so we became rebellious because of it. We became feral because we didn't have the standards, chiseled into us that we should have had. So we became a bit reckless and carefree, and like I said, I did things I'm not particularly proud of. Although most of the time I didn't start a lot of stuff. I just kind of got dragged into it. But I should have. But having said that, I should have known better. But then again, it's easy to say that now as an adult, but when you're a kid and that whole peer pressure thing, and when the consequences of what you do outside of school are going to have consequences for you when you go to school. So you do things because you know that there's, sometimes it's better. It's just sometimes better just to kind of go along with things, even though you didn't actually want to. Sometimes we'd hide away and. We'd go to somewhere new, we'd do something different. We'd spend time in the farm fields, and because where my house was, well, my original house anyway, or one of my original houses, parents' original houses, there was like the farmland there, and so we used to spend a lot of time in the corn or whatever it was, at whatever season it was, and sometimes you'd see the farmer on a quad bike or in a car or something, and we used to like getting chased, and it was just so much fun because you had these little drains, so it wasn't like always simple as just like you just go down here to skate. Sometimes you had to jump over little like drain areas, we used to go down to like these like big drain areas that obviously led out to the River Humber. And sometimes we used to go under these little bridges and just kind of see what we could find in the water there. And Like I said, I had a wonderful childhood in many ways, if I'm honest. I sometimes like my youthful days off a little bit, maybe a little bit too much, but in many ways, like I said, it wasn't perfect, but far from it. But yeah, I had some fucking good times, man. Looking back on it now, I was so fucking lucky, and I didn't realise it. I mean, yeah, some things certainly should have been a lot better, but I was lucky. I was lucky, really. I had a good chance. I had a good childhood in terms of my friends most of the time. We had some good times, go around to their house, maybe watch something or play on their console, or we'd just chat. Sometimes we'd just chat. We'd just have a bit of a chat or something, watch something on the TV, or play a game or something, whatever we did. Obviously we used to have sleepovers back then. I used to sleep over at my friend's house from time to time. I think most of the time it was with Paddy or with Damien. We used to stay at their houses. From what I can remember, anyway. I think maybe I might have stayed at a few of my friends' houses. I can't recall off the top of my head. I can't really remember. But yeah, that was always fun until you kind of got a bit sick and tired of it, by the end of the night or whatever. But I always remember, like, their mothers. I was always quite. It's one of them had a pretty hot mother, and I was always like I always found myself kind of staring at her, and like, God knows what she must have thought. I don't know, but you are a bit of a horny devil, aren't you, when you're in your early teens? Let's face it. So, and also you're just trying to figure out your sexuality, aren't you? Really, by the time you're 12, 13 years old, you don't know anything yet, but you got some instinct and some, what you like. Typically, I would say. But I knew that I was attracted to females because my elder brother used to have these porn magazines, and I always remember, like, these girls with big tits and whatever, and I knew by the time I was like 11 or 12, really. In fact, I probably knew earlier than that. I probably knew by the time I was like 7 or 8, I think, that I knew I was attracted to the opposite sex. Anyway, that's really a bit too much information, but yeah, it was a good time. I had a good time as a kid, as a teenager. I used to listen to my brother's CDs. I remember he had this big speaker system, and I used to listen to his CDs when he used to go out the house. Or, I used to like to watch things on the Sky back then. Like, I used to listen to music on the MTV and whatever it was, various channels, and loved all that stuff. And it was such a great time. The early 2000s was such a great time in my city because you had quite a lot of development going on back then. There was a freshness in the air. There was this renewal. There was this looking to the future now that we're in the millennium. And I always remember bonfire nights being very special back then. Halloween. I was never that massively into Halloween. From time to time, I think I used to go out and get involved in it, but not very often. I always loved bonfire night, though. I remember coming home from when school finished. I think it was like 4 or 5 o'clock, whatever it was. And people was kind of already started setting off fireworks, and you could sometimes smell bonfire in the distance somewhere or whatever. I just loved all that. I loved all of it. It was. And the air, the freshness of the air at times of the year at my primary school, because it was right on the edge of the city. There was better quality air there. It just felt very nice in that area. I don't know. I've just got so many different memories so many different things. My first girlfriends, you know, my first time I ever kissed a girl, you know, fighting with my friends, you know, fights. I used to get into so many fights at school. It's unbelievable, really. Like I said, I was a bit of a tearaway, a bit of a rebellious kid. Certainly by the time I got to secondary school, I was kind of out of control, really. Like, I think within the first few days or weeks of starting secondary school, I was already fighting. I think I got put on report for it, I think. Remember that, getting put on report? I think I got excluded maybe twice, 2 or 3 times from school for fighting or swearing at the teacher or whatever. You used to have these reports, they had different colours, and by the time you ended up on the red one, that was the last straw. And usually you had to go into the like a sort of like pre-exclusion zone of the school, where you had to like write out lines. Do you remember that when you started? I will behave, I will behave, I will behave. The teachers were always pissed off with me all the time, and you know, not exactly painting a very good picture of myself here, am I? But at least I'm being honest with you. I really wasn't exactly. I had a difficult childhood in many ways. I had a fun childhood, but I had a difficult childhood because of issues at home, issues at school with bullying. And I was I was out of control. I remember once I got excluded from primary school. I remember like almost fighting with one of the teachers, and I just left the school, went out of school. The parents never knew anything about it. Still don't to this day. I spent the whole day, like, I think I just like walked around and and I think I got excluded for like 2 days or 3 days or something. Can't remember now, but like I remember like the next day, like my mum had this like big bag of sweets in like a shopping trolley, and I took loads of them out and put them in my pockets, I think, on my coat or whatever. And I just remember just like eating them all day long. Like I pretended to go to school, put my uniform, everything obviously. And I just like stayed around like the garages area all day. Like I did nothing else. I just walked around because I didn't know what to do. I was like, if I go home, I'm going to get into shit. You know, Dad's going to belt me because, you know, Dad was quite strict like that. But so, you know, it was, I mean, like I said, I could have got myself into so many problems, so much trouble. You know, all sorts of things could have happened to me. You know, I was so naive, so naive. I had no idea. Thankfully, nothing ever did, but I'll never forget that area, you know, just standing there, just like, what the fuck am I going to do for the next God knows how many hours? I can't even really remember what I did for the rest of the day. I just remember like standing there, eating these candies, just like, I think I must have asked like people what the time was or something. So that must have been somewhere like, that must have been about the year 2000 or 2001 or something. And it was a bizarre, strange day, really. It's like, what do you do? Because you can't just go home, can you? I don't know if I did go home. I don't know if I ended up telling them what happened in the end. I can't remember now, but in a way, I kind of miss that. You know, I miss that kind of thing. And I miss certain teachers. I miss even like certain dinner ladies from school. Like from Isaac, we had some nice dinner ladies, quite friendly. You know, 1 or 2 of them were quite attractive, even though they were like middle-aged back then. You know, typically dinner ladies were usually in their like 40s, 50s. But I found myself attracted to one or two of them. Some of them were quite ugly-looking women. But there was one, I can't remember what her name was now, but she was quite attractive. I thought, anyway, at that time. Whether I would find her attractive now, I don't know, but probably not. It's a weird world, isn't it, as a kid? You know, the world is such a strange place to a child, you know. It's such a bizarre experience, you know. It's like it really is very exciting exhilarating, thrilling. It's when things like that happen, where you don't know what to do, but there are consequences if you do this or that. It's like there was something exciting about it, and I think sometimes I miss that. I miss that about life. I miss that sort of sense of danger, but kind of comfort as well. That living on the edge a little bit, that living a bit wild and free, maybe. Because I think that's what life should be about. It should be about a little bit of danger, a little bit of the unknown, and because you only get one life, so you might as well, make the best of it while you can. It's not always going to be comfort and it's not always going to be easy, but sometimes that can make life better. Because it gets you out of your comfort zone, it makes you feel a bit more alive temporarily. That's the thing I don't feel a lot of these days, is that thrill of feeling alive anymore. I just become kind of, my mind's become very docile in some ways, become very used to the same habits, the same things. And I just miss so much about the past. I really do. I miss how cheap things used to be. I was a massive sugar head back in the day. Like, absolutely loved chocolate, and we used to have these candies, like 1p candies, and I don't even know if they do that anymore. But I doubt the 1p anymore. And you used to get you could just fill your head with just so many E numbers, and just crash out on sugar back then because it was so cheap. I don't know if you remember those Panda Pops, things like that. Like, remember Sunny Delight? That was a huge thing back then. So many different chocolate bars as well that we used to I was just somehow like the double decker, the fudge, Freddy's. There was a nugget one that we used to have. It was this red package called, I don't know if it was called Nugget or if it's, I can't remember what it was called now, but I haven't seen that in years. So many things have just come and gone. So many things have changed. It's quite remarkable, really. I remember having my first real girlfriend at 14. I've talked about Rebecca a number of times before. That was a turning point in my life in some ways. I remember riding to a house. And, I remember seeing her first of all in the school, and the after school. I went to this because there was another school nearby ours, but that was mostly for I think it was for disabled children or sort of really problematic children. And anyway, they had this dance thing in there, and I remember seeing Rebecca in there dancing, and I just kind of fell for her, really. I fell for her. I remember seeing her at school. She was already with someone at the time called Sean. And I just always was like, she's got to be mine. She's got to be my girlfriend. And I really loved that part of my life. A 14, 15-year-old period. That was a good time. I was so infatuated. I was so head over heels for her. Honestly, I was so madly in love with her at the time. I really loved that girl. I really genuinely did. We used to meet up at lunch. We used to see each other in the corridors and wherever throughout the school, and I don't know. It was. I miss those times. I really miss them. Seeing each other after school, walking home, saying goodbyes, and so both of us turning our heads at the same time and seeing each other and waving again to each other and all that kind of stuff. That very innocent, very naive, first love kind of thing, and was innocent, it was playful, it was a bit silly, a bit naive, looking back on it in hindsight, but it meant a lot to me back then. It really meant a lot to me. And I'll never forget Rebecca. I'll never ever forget her. She'll always have a part. She'll always be in my mind. She'll always be in my heart for the rest of my life. I can't just forget about her as much as I would like to. I don't obsess over her, but she meant a lot to me. That was a really serious pivotal point in my life. I remember being so overjoyed at the time. I've finally got a girlfriend, and I think I called her as well for my house phone at the time. I remember how embarrassing that was. You have to call when you have to speak to your friends or your girlfriend over the phone when your parents were right there, right next to you, listening to. Because you were so self-conscious back then, weren't you? So obsessed with being cool and hip and all that, and your parents sort of saw through it all. But he was just learning, he was just growing, he was just being a kid. But he didn't think he was a kid. I didn't think I was a teenager, and I think it's because part of me, I felt more mature than my years in some ways back then. I didn't feel like a 14-year-old. I felt a bit older than I was. I think I felt probably more at 14. I think I probably felt a bit more like I felt a bit more like my 17, 18-year-old itself, actually. I don't know why, but I always felt a bit more mature. I didn't feel like a kid anymore at 14, 15. I felt more like an adult than I did a kid. And that's because I was maturing more back that time, or 4 or 5 or 6 time. I remember, the teachers talking about it, and you've really turned yourself around, David, and you're doing better now, and I'm really proud of you, blah blah blah, and that really meant a lot to me. Like teachers like Mr. Bennett, Miss Green, Mr. O'Toole, they had confidence in me, they believed in me. And other teachers didn't. At primary school, teachers like Mr. Vokes, they had belief in me, they had confidence in me. They saw something in me that I didn't see myself. They felt like I had some spark of potential, and I never really saw it. I never, as much as I appreciated and felt good about what they said, I never saw it, but I never saw what they saw in myself. And so a lot of the time I ended up out of the classroom halfway from the class because I was back chatting and, being problematic and, just being a nuisance, because first of all, I hated most of my secondary school classes for the most part. And again, at primary school, a lot of it was just bullying, whereas at secondary school, a lot of it became more physical assault stuff. It was bullying. It was a mixture of, well, I think I started fighting back. I started standing up for myself a bit more by the time I was 12, 13, I think. But obviously that became problematic because it became too reactionary. So I think I didn't really truly mature, I suppose, in terms of how to deal with that stuff. I want to say probably by the time I was 14, 15, and I think part of that was because I was in the boys' brigade at the time, and it taught me a bit more about self-respect and having empathy and compassion and kindness and trying to be a decent human being and love thy neighbour, turn a blind eye, not turn a blind eye, so an eye for an eye, all that kind of stuff. And generally speaking, I just kind of felt more comfortable in myself at 14, 15 than I probably had in a lot of the years before that. School, as much as I loved primary school, you just never knew what you was going to get from one day to the next. I mean, it was kind of a bit similar at secondary school, but I think people gained more respect from me over time at secondary school. even some of the kids that used to kind of take the piss when I first started secondary, like over time, I think that they actually had a bit more respect for me because they knew that I wasn't just going to be a pushover anymore. I wasn't just going to let people walk all over me. Even like there was a kid called Jack, and he was a bit of a, he could be a bit two-faced, but every now and again he could be all right with you. It was pretty decent actually at times. Jack, it was a good lad really. He wasn't a dickhead or anything, but he just never quite knew what version you was going to get with him. It's like one day he could be a bit of a twat to you, the next day he was taking the piss, and then the next day, it was having a laugh with you. So you just never really knew where you stood with him. And there were other kids like that at secondary school. You never quite knew which version of them we were going to get. Even some of the bigger sort of alpha male types of the school, Tony and Matthew and others, or just those in other years as well, like my older brother, Kevin's years. And sometimes they could not be all right to you. Sometimes they wouldn't bother you, they wouldn't say anything to you, sometimes they'd even talk to you, But then there's other times where they'd ignore you, So it was really a bit of a walking on eggshell situation at secondary school a lot of the time, until I think by the time we got towards like year sort of 10, year 11 time, when everyone sort of started to finally settle down a bit and sort of get a bit more serious about their studying, because obviously we're just about to leave school and head to college or whatever, heading to work. And I think by the time I was 15, certainly 15, 16, I think overall, apart from a few absolute fucking wankers in the school, most of the kids, I think, had a bit more respect for me. They even probably liked me to some extent, but they didn't want to say that because it would make them lose their cool status, or their perceived cool status. But at secondary, I quite liked spending time during, in the mornings, at secondary school. Sometimes we'd come to school in the middle of winter and we'd have to go home because the heating wasn't working, or again, sometimes it'd be snow. It was a great time. It really was. I remember seeing all the cars back then as well. The Nissans, the Renaults, the Fords, etc. Peugeots, etc. And the Ford car and the car and I remember seeing the smart car, one of the smart cars. I don't know if that was an 04 or 05 plate. And those mid 2000s were kind of quite an interesting period in terms of some of those cars I used to see at school. Now I always you could always identify who was at school by the cars that you saw. You always knew, that Renault's this teacher, that Nissan's Miss Pinder, that car's the sports teacher, that car's the science teacher, etc. I could always pick them out. I don't know if other kids had that, but I certainly was always I know who's here now. And even if you couldn't see the cars clearly, you could tell by the paintwork, So I must have been a bit autistic, I guess. And there was certain smells at secondary school that we didn't have at primary school as well. Obviously the classrooms were different. It was a much bigger school. There must have been at least probably a good 1,000 students at secondary school. Whereas at my primary, probably, I don't know, it must have been probably a good, maybe 400, 500 kids, I'm guessing, something like that. I remember the waiting. I always remember being fascinated by the waiting areas, and the teachers on space. Because sometimes I used to look in the windows and I was a bit of a nosy bugger, but I was fascinated by that stuff. I was fascinated by the kind of things that you were kind of told not to do or you're expected not to do. And so, I was just I was always kind of rebelling against authority and rules and what's expected of you as a kid, and that's kind of followed me up until today. Really, it's like I've always had that streak in me. And I always remember, like, sometimes at secondary school where I used to get into trouble, and if you was fighting or whatever it was, whether it was in the class or whatever, you had to go in the office sometimes, this like main office area, right into where the entrance was of the school. These big yellow doors, and yeah, it doesn't feel like it was nearly 20 years ago. I can't believe next year it'll be what was it, June, something like that, June, July next year. It'll be 20 years ago since I left secondary school. 20 fucking years ago, man. I can't believe it's been that long. Because I don't know, weirdly it does feel like it was that long. Sometimes it doesn't as well. It's hard to, I don't know why that is, but it doesn't feel like it was that long. It's like, yeah, it's, a lot of shit's happened in 20 years, but like, part of me still feels like I'm there, really, if I'm honest. Like, I can still see myself. I can still look around, It's like, it's a bit faded now. Obviously, I haven't been in the school for 20 years, so I can't remember exactly where everything is, but I've got a general vagueness of kind of where things are. The school's gone now, where it was demolished a few years ago, but the older parts of the school. But I remember the dining hall quite well, the sports area, the little corridors, the stairs. The gymnasium, all that kind of stuff. Little hot spots kids used to hang around around the back of the school, and the kind of silly little games we used to play during our lunch break. And I loved all that stuff. I think for me, school was, I enjoyed school probably more in the winter than I did any other time of the year. I liked school during the summer, because we had like sports events and whatever, and it was quite nice to come to school, and all the grass had been cut, and you'd see all the team there with the tractors and machinery and stuff. Especially if there was like some big sports thing going on, if it was like a competition or whatever, and that was always nice. You could always hear them as you was coming to school into the school gates. You'd hear all the machinery on the field behind the main school buildings. I used to hang around at the art block as well from time to time, and sometimes we'd get in trouble for banging on the doors and things like that. Just kids being kids. And sometimes we'd go out of school during our lunch breaks. We'd go to like our local like little area where I'll go and get some pop or some snacks, or like maybe sometimes we'd go and eat something outside the school, like fish and chips maybe, or some like whatever it was, whatever you wanted really. And I liked that. I liked that aspect of school, that you could leave it during school, during the break. Sometimes I used to go home. I remember that. Sometimes I used to go home during lunch, just for a little bit, and then come back to school, usually late by 5 or 10 minutes. If I'm honest, I really didn't care that much about school. It was, in terms of the educational side of it, for me, I found school more of a stimuli thing, more of an experience rather than it. I never really took it seriously, because I never felt academically gifted enough to really make an effort. So for me, it was like, by the time I certainly tried harder as the years went on at secondary, but I think for the most part, I just never really enjoyed learning. For me, apart from like learning about computers or a bit of history or sports or music, or I didn't mind a bit of English, didn't mind a bit of geography, but things like certain aspects of science, certain like mathematical topics and stuff really fucking bored the shit out of me, if I'm honest. It was just never really my thing. I was never good at it, and I knew I wasn't good at it, so I didn't So I just didn't bother. I knew I wasn't going to be competent, so I just gave up. And that often meant that I became unruly and I was disruptive, and so the teacher often pulled me aside or sat me somewhere else in the classroom because I was talking too much, or I got kicked out of the class a few times, especially during Mr. Starr's lessons. He was a maths teacher. Good God, that teacher was boring as fuck. Weirdly, I didn't actually kind of mind religious studies. It's like a lot of them found it boring. I actually found it quite interesting. I didn't like the reading stuff, but for me, I didn't mind listening to teachers. I could listen to them, but I didn't really like reading so much. I hated it. I certainly hated tests and all that kind of guy. I always hated that stuff. See, I knew from very early on, even when I was at primary school, I knew I wasn't academically gifted. I knew it probably by the time I was 7 or something, 8 years old. So that part of me was just I just kind of went to school because it was expected of me. I didn't really have any say in it. I had to go to school. Well, I didn't necessarily have to, but my parents would have played apeshit if I hadn't gone to school. So I just did it to please them, really. But I never really got that much out of school as far as education is concerned. For me, school was about my friends. It was about girls. It was about whatever was going on, in the news or fashion, music, whatever, whatever. Someone's brought some new trainers to school, or someone has a new bag, or someone has a new notebook, kind of just kind of, I was always interested in the things that didn't mean anything really, that had no real value, but my head was always in the skies, I was always daydreaming, I couldn't wait to get out of the class. I was always fascinated by sound, and I loved being outside of school, a lot of the time. When I was in class, my mind was often outside the classroom. I was interested in what was going on in the corridors, because sometimes you'd hear kids being troublesome in the corridors, or someone's arguing with one of the teachers or whatever. My school certainly wasn't very classy, I must say. But it was what it was, and again, I just did what I could to make the best of that situation. I hated being at school a lot of the time. I didn't hate school overall. I just hated learning. I quite liked school. I quite liked getting away from my house. I liked meeting my friends, and especially after the summer holidays, because you had a lot to talk about. There's always something new. Talk about the holidays, or whatever they've been doing, or talk about, because sometimes people didn't go away on the holidays. They're 6-week breaks, so you might meet them a lot during that period of time. And there was always someone that had a crush on someone in the classroom, or there was always someone that had a crush on one of the teachers, and all that kind of silly stuff. I miss all that as well, all of it. I miss all of it, a whole lot of it. I miss being a kid. I miss being a teenager. They were great parts of my life, and I don't think I've really truly appreciated them until the last few years of my life, really, because they're gone. You can't get them back, but I have the memories, and I won't forget them as best as I can. I had so many girlfriends for primary and secondary school years, but Rebecca was probably the first real one I ever had. I remember once I went to her house, and it was about 7 o'clock, and I remember looking up at the sky, and there was these stars, and it's these 3 stars close together, and that's always stayed with me. That's another memory that stuck with me for some reason. I was 14 then, or 15, and I remember slapping her ass. It's just it's kind of ridiculous to say this stuff, but it was. We just sat there in the front of a garden, just hugging, I think, and just talking, just being teenagers. You know, it's fucking special, man. It was fucking special, and I didn't appreciate it because I didn't think I would ever get older. I didn't think I would ever lose my childhood. I didn't think I would ever become an adult. You know? So it's, I appreciated the moments as best as I could at the time, but I didn't really truly value them because I didn't think there would ever be real memories for me. How many times do you just do things in your life and you're not really thinking that much about it. You're just kind of doing it, and that was what it was like back then. Over 20 years ago now, 04, 05 time. I remember the kind of the boy racing culture thing back then. The whole chaff culture thing, and we used to hang out a lot of the time on the track with certain friends anyway. There was these like little climbing, like I don't know what they were for, but they had these like big concrete like things. We used to climb on them, and we used to go all over the place. We used to hang out on our bikes from time to time. We used to walk around places. We used to do all sorts of stuff. And weirdly, I don't think we ever really truly ever got bored because like we always did something. We always had something to do. We always thought of something to do. It's like I can't imagine this generation being like that now. It's like everything's for you now. It's like everything's done for you. So you don't have to be that creative anymore. You don't have to be that flexible of the mind. You don't have to use your initiative or invent anything anymore. It's like most people don't. Most people are glued to the phones. And I don't know. I just think we've lost so much great stuff. We lost a great culture of what it is to have a childhood. Talking about life from a child's perspective. Talking about the future. Talking about girls that we liked. Talking about teachers at school. School in general, whatever was going on at school, whatever, sort of singing certain things, miming certain things, we saw on in TV or music videos when they used to be a massively popular thing, like copying certain rap or R&B or pop songs, etc. We were just obsessed with it. Sharing like ringtones and it was just such a it really was a very, very, very special, unique and wonderful part of my life, and I miss it greatly. I miss my friends, I miss the girlfriends I had, I miss the times of innocence, of being naive and ignorant about the world. I miss my parents when they were younger in some ways, my brothers, my sister. My grandparents were still alive then. The world wasn't quite as fucked up and as chaotic as it is now. Social media hadn't taken over everyone's lives. The smartphone hadn't taken over everyone's lives yet. It was just a really fucking special time, man. Really special. I would fucking do anything to go back to those times. And then they're just a few of my memories, There's loads of things I could talk about. And some things, honestly, I've probably forgotten about at this point, it's been so long. But, that's just a kind of general overview of it. But I just wish, honestly, I wish sometimes I could go back and relive it all again. Because I would say that every fucking second of it. If I knew where my life was going to go, if I knew where the world was going to go, I would have valued that stuff and appreciated it so much more than I did. But like I said, it's easy to look back 20 years on and look back at things through rose-tinted glasses, I suppose, in some ways, and not exactly, but to a certain extent. And hindsight is wonderful to have, but I should have appreciated things much more back then. But I was a kid. How could I have appreciated things? I didn't even know what the word meant. I didn't, and you have no concept you don't really have any concept of time as a kid. Even as a teenager, time doesn't really mean that much to you. It exists, but it doesn't, you don't really think it's real. Like it's not, it doesn't, life isn't real yet. I don't think life really feels truly real to you until you become an adult, until you get until you've had a bit of experience in life as an adult. Life doesn't feel real. It's a playground, it's a learning experience. It's a fun park, it's just a endless source of learning, of fun, really, I would say, most of the time. And adulthood isn't. Most of adulthood is spent working, is spent stressing and worrying and thinking about the future, and doing what I've done throughout this video, reflecting, reminiscing, because you miss the past, because you miss the days before you had to worry about responsibilities and having to be accountable. And pressure all the time and constant worry. I miss the past. I miss it. I miss the past a lot. And sometimes I really, really do wish I could go back. And if it was somehow possible to go back, I think I probably would. Not forever, but I would certainly like to go back and, I would just take so much more. It would just mean so much more to me now as an adult, I think. If I could go back and see it through the eyes of both my younger self and my adult self, it means so much more to me, I think. You don't think that you're going to change, you don't think that you're ever going to grow up. You don't think that you're going to... Adulthood doesn't mean anything yet. It doesn't resonate with you. It's not a real thing to you, Life's not really a real thing to you because you're not a part of it yet. You're protected in many ways, or at least you should be. And sometimes I miss that, I miss that sense of carelessness about life, towards life. I miss that carefree nature. I miss that sense of freedom and independence that I once had, that I don't really feel that much of anymore. I miss that sense of wonder about the world, that sense of hope, that sense of longing for whatever might be coming down the line. Now I don't feel quite so much like that anymore. If you lived through the 90s and 90s in the UK, you know what I mean. Especially if you had a kind of similar upbringing to mine, then you know what I'm talking about. You know what I mean. It's fucking special, man. What a shame it's all gone. But in the end, memories are the only thing that are left. What's left? That's all you have. That's all you have to continue on in your life. One day this will be a memory too. So, Don't forget your past. Revisit it from time to time. Be emotional if you want to be emotional about it. But don't get stuck in it either. But, look back at it and appreciate what you had, because those years, I believe those years in many respects are probably some of the best times that we will ever have in our lives. And I think deep down most of us know it. I'm not saying we won't have good times in the future or in the present, but you will never, ever be able to be that person that you was as a kid, as a teenager. It will never, ever happen. And that's both sad, admittedly, but also it makes it more precious. It makes it more valuable. It means that it has meaning because of it. And it's only because you can't go back, you can't experience it again, that you long for it. But at least you can think about it. So you kind of get a kind of sense of what it was like to go through it again, through your memories, sort of vaguely. Fucking cling on to that, man. Cling on to that stuff with both hands, because sometimes you're gonna need that. You're gonna need that in this life, in this world. Sometimes that's the only thing we're living for. It's the only thing we've got left. Catch you on the next one. Thank you for listening.